Becky Scholes had a rule about lying. She didn't do it. Not for convenience, not for comfort, not for the kind of small social lubricant that most people applied to their daily lives without a second thought. She had grown up in a household where honesty was not merely encouraged but expected. Her father, a retired schoolteacher from Evanston, had raised her on the simple and uncompromising belief that the truth, however uncomfortable, was always the cleaner path. Which made what she agreed to do on that Thursday afternoon in October all the more extraordinary. It started, as most of life's more consequential mistakes do, with a phone call she almost didn't answer. She was sitting at her desk on the 14th floor of Aldridge and Bloom Communications, the mid-sized PR firm in downtown Chicago where she had worked for 3 years as a senior account strategist, eating a sad desk lunch of leftover pasta and reviewing a client brief that was due before 5. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She let it ring twice, considered ignoring it, and then picked up with the particular resignation of someone who has learned that ignored calls have a way of becoming larger problems. "Is this Becky Scholes?" The voice was male. Deep, measured, and carrying the faint but unmistakable undertone of someone who was not accustomed to being in a position that required him to ask strangers for favors. Speaking. "My name is John Jackson. You don't know me. I was given your number by Marcus Webb. He says you worked together 2 years ago at Donnelly Communications and that you are, in his words, the most unflappable person he has ever met." Becky set down her fork. "Marcus said that? He also said you were between relationships, which I recognize is an inappropriate thing to relay and I apologize for it. But it is relevant to why I'm calling." She leaned back in her chair slowly. "Mr. Jackson. What exactly are you calling to ask me?" A pause. Brief, controlled, the kind of pause a person takes when they have already decided to say the thing but are giving themselves one final moment before it becomes irreversible. "I need someone to pose as my fiancée for one weekend. My family's annual gathering is in Lake Geneva this Friday through Sunday. I told my mother 6 months ago that I was engaged. I am not engaged. The woman I was seeing ended things 3 weeks ago and I have not found a way to explain this to my family before the weekend, which begins in 36 hours. Another pause. I will compensate you generously for your time. All expenses covered. Separate accommodation within the property. And Marcus assures me you are someone who can handle a room." Becky stared at the wall of her office for a long moment. "Mr. Jackson," she said carefully. "This is the strangest phone call I have received in my professional life. I imagine it is. Will you consider it?" She should have said no. Every sensible, honest, rule-following instinct she possessed lined up in a row and said no clearly and in unison. She had plans for the weekend, quiet ones, admittedly, involving a novel she had been meaning to finish and a bottle of wine she had been saving, but plans nonetheless. She did not know this man. She did not pretend to be things she wasn't. She had a rule. "I'll meet you first," she said. "In person. Today. And then I'll decide." They met at a coffee place on Michigan Avenue at 4:30, which gave her exactly 45 minutes between the end of her workday and the time she had mentally allotted for talking herself out of whatever this was. John Jackson was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table, jacket on, hands around a coffee cup, watching the door with the alert stillness of someone who made a habit of arriving early and using the time to observe. He was not what she had constructed in her mind during the cab ride over. She had imagined someone older, perhaps, or with the particular glossy polish of Chicago money that she had encountered often enough in her PR work to recognize on sight. John Jackson was 36, she would learn later, and he was handsome in a way that was straightforward rather than constructed, strong jaw, dark eyes that were direct without being aggressive, a quality of attention in his face that made you feel, when he looked at you, that you were the only thing in the room worth looking at. He stood when she approached. Extended his hand. "Ms. Scholes. Thank you for coming." "I haven't agreed to anything yet," she said, sitting down. "I know." He sat. "I appreciate you coming anyway." She studied him across the small table. Tell me about your family. He told her. His mother, Eleanor Jackson, was 71 years old and had been widowed 6 years ago when his father, Gerald Jackson, founder of Jackson Capital Partners, one of the largest private equity firms in the Midwest, had died of a heart attack at 68. She was warm, sharp, deeply traditional, and had been asking John about marriage since he turned 30. When he had mentioned, during a phone call 6 months ago, that he was seeing someone seriously, she had responded with such genuine and unguarded joy that he had, in a moment of weakness he had been regretting ever since, confirmed that yes, they were engaged. His younger sister, Diana, was 32 and already married with 2 children and the kind of organized contentment that made her an enthusiastic and occasionally relentless advocate for everyone around her achieving the same. His uncle Robert, his father's younger brother, would also be there, and Robert had never particularly liked John, a feeling that was thoroughly mutual and had been a quiet undercurrent at every family gathering for the past decade. "Why didn't you just tell your mother the truth?" Becky asked. "That the engagement ended?" John looked at his coffee cup. Something moved across his face, not evasion exactly, but the careful arranging of something complicated into words. "My mother was diagnosed with a heart condition 8 months ago. Manageable, the doctors say, but stress is a significant factor. The engagement has been the thing that has made her happiest in 2 years. Since my father died." He paused. "I couldn't take it from her over a phone call. I thought I would have more time to manage it. I didn't." Becky was quiet for a moment. "And after this weekend? What happens when the engagement continues to not result in a wedding?" "I'll tell her the truth after. Gently, with time and care. I just need to get through this weekend without her finding out at a family gathering in front of everyone, which is what will happen if I arrive alone." It was, she thought, a deeply human kind of mess. Not malicious. Not calculated. Just a son who loved his mother and had made one small lie that had grown, the way small lies do, into something requiring a weekend in Lake Geneva and a phone call to a stranger recommended by a mutual friend. She looked at him steadily. "I have conditions." "Name them." "Separate rooms, as you said. No physical contact beyond what's socially necessary, a hand on the back, that sort of thing, nothing more without my explicit agreement in the moment. I need the full background story of the supposed relationship before we arrive, how we met, how long, the proposal, all of it, and I need time to memorize it properly. And you will tell your mother the truth after this weekend. Not in 3 months. After." "Agreed. All of it. And Mr. Jackson." She met his eyes. "I'm doing this because your reason is genuinely about protecting someone you love. The moment it feels like anything else, I walk." He held her gaze without flinching. "Understood." She picked up her bag. "Send me the background story tonight. I'll need all of Friday morning to prepare. Pick me up at noon." She walked out of the coffee shop and stood on Michigan Avenue in the October wind and told herself, firmly and with great conviction, that she had this completely under control. Before we go any further, have you ever done something completely out of character because someone's reason for asking touched something real in you? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to know. John's driver picked her up at noon on Friday in a black SUV that was clean and quiet and entirely too comfortable for someone trying to maintain professional detachment. She had spent Thursday evening studying the background story he had sent. They had met 14 months ago at a fundraising gala. She was there representing a client. He had been on the committee. He had asked for her card. She had given it. He had called 3 days later. They had dated quietly, privately, for 11 months before he proposed at a restaurant in River North, small, no audience, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. She had memorized every detail. She had even, sitting cross-legged on her apartment floor at 11 o'clock at night with a glass of wine she had finally opened, found herself thinking that it was actually a rather lovely story. Simple. Real feeling. The kind of relationship that grows without performance. John was already in the car when it arrived. He was dressed casually, dark trousers, a gray sweater, and looked, she thought, like someone who had slept approximately 4 hours and was functioning on determination and good bone structure. He handed her a coffee without being asked. "You reviewed everything?" he asked. "Twice. Ask me anything." He tested her for 20 minutes during the drive, dates, details, the color of the ring she wasn't wearing because they had agreed a borrowed ring would feel too elaborate. She answered everything without hesitation, and somewhere around the third correct answer she watched something in his face ease slightly, the particular relaxation of a person who had been braced for disaster and is beginning to recalculate the odds. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm good at preparation," she said. "It's not the same thing." He looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. Fair distinction. The Jackson family property in Lake Geneva was not what Becky had expected, which was a significant thing to say given that she had expected something impressive. It was a large, beautifully maintained estate set back from the lake, with a wide wraparound porch and the kind of unpretentious solidity that spoke of old money comfortable enough with itself to have nothing to prove. The trees along the drive had gone fully amber and gold in the October afternoon light, and the whole scene had the warm, slightly cinematic quality of a life photographed at its best angle. Eleanor Jackson was waiting on the porch. She was smaller than Becky had imagined, slight, silver-haired, with bright, sharp eyes that took in everything at once and a smile that arrived so quickly and so genuinely when she saw John that it rearranged the air around her entirely. She came down the porch steps with a steadiness that suggested she had no interest in being treated as fragile, took John's face in her hands for a moment, and then turned to Becky with those sharp, warm eyes and said, "So you're the one." Becky smiled. "I'm the one." Eleanor took her hands the way certain mothers do, holding them rather than shaking them, looking at her with the particular directness of someone who has lived long enough to trust their instincts about people. "He told me you were lovely," she said. He was understating it considerably. Becky felt something she had not prepared for, a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the simple, undefended love in this woman's face. She had expected to feel like an actor. Instead she felt, unexpectedly and inconveniently, like a guest. Diana was inside with her husband and their 2 children, who were loud and delightful and immediately demanded that Becky adjudicate a dispute about a board game with the confidence of children who have decided in 30 seconds that a new adult is trustworthy. She adjudicated. She was apparently fair, because both children accepted the verdict. Diana watched this from the doorway with a raised eyebrow and said, "Okay. I like her." Uncle Robert arrived at dinner. He was 64, heavy-set, with the particular energy of a man who enters rooms already looking for something to be dissatisfied with. He shook Becky's hand with the perfunctory courtesy of someone performing civility rather than feeling it, sat at the far end of the table, and spent the first 20 minutes of dinner asking John questions about the firm's recent acquisitions in a tone that contained, beneath the surface of polite inquiry, a consistent and practiced diminishment that made Becky's jaw tighten. John answered every question with the same measured calm he seemed to bring to everything, not defensive, not deferential, simply steady. But she noticed, in the moments between questions, the particular set of his shoulders that she was already learning to read. The effort it took to stay composed in a room where someone was determined to find the seams. Under the table, without thinking about it, she placed her hand over his. He went very still for a moment. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over and held hers, and she felt something shift between them that was quiet and specific and entirely outside the script they had agreed on. Saturday was a revelation. Not because anything dramatic occurred, but because the ordinary texture of the weekend, morning coffee on the porch with Eleanor, a walk along the lake path in the October chill, helping Diana's children construct something ambitious and structurally questionable out of blankets and dining chairs, had a warmth and ease that Becky had not budgeted for. She had expected to feel like a visitor behind glass. Instead she felt, and this was the word she kept returning to and kept trying to set aside, at home. John was different here than he had been in the coffee shop or in the car. Not different in character, the same directness, the same unhurried composure, the same quality of attention. But looser, somehow. She watched him sit on the porch floor and build a puzzle with his niece for 45 minutes with the kind of complete and ungrudging presence that told you everything about who a person was when no one important was watching. She watched him sit with his mother after lunch, the two of them talking quietly in the sitting room, Eleanor's hand on his arm, and felt something she couldn't name press softly against the inside of her chest. They were alone for the first time that evening, walking along the lake path after dinner while the rest of the family settled inside. The sky over Lake Geneva was enormous and dark and scattered with more stars than Chicago ever allowed, and their breath made small clouds in the cold air, and she was thinking things she had not given herself permission to think. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask." "The woman who ended things 3 weeks ago. What happened?" He was quiet for a moment, hands in his pockets, eyes on the water. "She said I wasn't present. That I was there but never entirely there. That loving me felt like, she said it felt like trying to have a conversation with someone who had one hand on the door." He paused. She wasn't wrong. Becky looked at him sideways. And was she? One hand on the door. "I think I had been for a long time. With a lot of things." He glanced at her. "I'm trying to understand why." She thought about that. About the puzzle on the floor with his niece. About his hand turning over under the table last night. About the way he looked at his mother when he thought no one was watching, not with the careful performance of a dutiful son but with the raw, unguarded love of someone who is quietly terrified of loss. "I don't think you have one hand on the door here," she said carefully. "This weekend. I don't think you're halfway anywhere." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He looked at her in the dark with those direct, dark eyes, and she felt the full weight of 3 days of proximity and pretending collapse into something that was neither proximate nor pretend. "Becky," he said. And then he said nothing else, because he was a man who did not say things he hadn't finished thinking, and she could see him thinking. She saved him the trouble. "I know," she said quietly. "I know. Me too." He exhaled, slow, careful, and reached out and tucked her hand into his arm the way you do when you want to keep walking but you don't want to let go, and they walked the rest of the path in a silence that was full rather than empty, warm rather than careful, and entirely unlike anything she had agreed to on Thursday afternoon. Sunday arrived like a verdict. She was packed by 10. Her bag sat by the door of the guest room, this beautiful, warm guest room in this beautiful, warm house with this family she had known for 48 hours and felt, in some way she couldn't logically defend, reluctant to leave. She sat on the edge of the bed and had a very direct conversation with herself about the difference between what was real and what had been constructed. About the danger of feeling at home in a place that wasn't yours. About the very significant fact that she had been hired for this weekend, that her presence here had a transactional origin story, that whatever she felt walking along that lake path last night existed inside a fiction she had agreed to perform. She was still having this conversation with herself when there was a knock on her door. It was Diana. She came in without the children for the first time all weekend, closed the door behind her, and sat in the armchair by the window with the particular composure of someone who has something to say and has decided to simply say it. "I know," she said. Becky went still. "I'm sorry. I know you two aren't actually engaged." Diana's voice was calm. Not angry. Not accusatory. Simply matter of fact. "I've known since Friday evening. John has a tell, he's had it since we were children. He touches the back of his neck when he's managing something. He did it 7 times at dinner." Becky said nothing. "I'm not going to tell Mom," Diana continued. "I understand why he did it and honestly, knowing my brother, I'm not surprised it came to this." She paused. "What I want to know is whether what I watched happen this weekend is also part of the performance. Because if it is, you're both extraordinary actors. And if it isn't," she looked at Becky steadily, "then I think you should think very carefully about what you do with it." After Diana left, Becky sat in the quiet of the guest room for a long time. She thought about her rule. About honesty being the cleaner path. About how she had walked into this weekend with clear eyes and a memorized script and every intention of leaving on Sunday exactly as she had arrived on Friday, intact, uninvolved, professional. She thought about his hand turning over under the table. About the stars over Lake Geneva. About the way he had said her name on the path and then stopped, because he wasn't finished thinking and he didn't say things before he was finished. She picked up her bag and went downstairs. Here's something worth sitting with. Have you ever tried to keep your heart out of something, and completely failed? Tell us in the comments. You're in good company. John was in the kitchen. Alone, for once, Eleanor was in the sitting room, Diana's children were somewhere loud, and the house had the particular quality of a Sunday morning winding slowly toward goodbye. He was standing at the counter with a coffee cup, looking out the window at the lake, and he turned when she came in with the alert attention she had noticed the very first time she walked into a room where he was waiting. He looked at her bag. Then at her face. "Diana told me she knows," he said. "She told me too." A beat. "I'm sorry. That wasn't John." She set her bag down. "I need to tell you something and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." He nodded. "I came into this weekend with a rule," she said. "I don't lie. I don't pretend. I don't perform things I don't feel. And I want to be honest with you about the fact that I have broken every single one of those principles this weekend, not because the job required it, but because somewhere between Friday and Sunday, it stopped feeling like a job." She met his eyes. "I don't know what to do with that. But I'm someone who believes in the truth even when it's inconvenient, and the truth is that whatever happened on that lake path last night, that was real. For me. And I needed you to know that before I left, because I would spend a long time regretting it if I didn't say it." The kitchen was very quiet. John set down his coffee cup. He crossed the room in 4 measured steps and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her face up slightly to look at him, and he looked at her with an expression so open and undefended that it was almost startling on a face that had seemed, at first, so controlled. "I fired Marcus," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I'm joking." The corner of his mouth moved. "I owe Marcus a significant gift. Because he told me you were unflappable and honest and someone who could handle a room, and all of that is true, but what he failed to mention, what he possibly didn't know, is that you are also the first person I have felt genuinely present with in longer than I can honestly account for." He paused. "I had one hand on the door for a long time, Becky. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I have not had one hand on the door once this entire weekend. And I think you know that." She did know that. "So what do we do?" she said quietly. "I would like," he said, with the same unhurried directness he brought to everything, "to take you to dinner next Friday. In Chicago. As ourselves. No script, no background story, no borrowed occasion." He held her gaze. "And I would like to tell my mother the truth today. About the engagement. Gently, carefully. She deserves that. And then I would like to see if whatever this is has somewhere real to go." She thought about her rule. About honesty being the cleaner path. And she thought that sometimes the cleanest path runs directly through the most unexpected territory, and the only honest thing to do is follow it. "Dinner on Friday," she said. He smiled, fully, genuinely, the kind of smile she suspected very few people received, and it rearranged something in the air between them that she suspected was going to stay rearranged for a very long time. He told his mother that afternoon. Eleanor listened the whole way through without interrupting, sitting in the sitting room with her hands in her lap and her sharp, warm eyes on her son's face. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Eleanor looked at Becky, who had insisted on being present because honesty, when it arrives, should not arrive alone, and said, "Did you know? When you came?" "Yes," Becky said. "I'm sorry." Eleanor was quiet for another moment. Then she said, to John, You did this because you didn't want me to be hurt at a family gathering. Yes. That is, Eleanor said, a very foolish and very loving thing to do. She sighed. I'm not angry. I'm a little exasperated. But I watched this girl with your sister's children on Saturday morning, and I watched her at dinner Friday night, and I watched the two of you come back from that walk last night, and John, she looked at her son with those eyes that missed nothing. Whatever this weekend was when it started, I am quite certain it is something else now. John looked at Becky. Becky looked at John. Yes, he said quietly. I think it is. They had dinner the following Friday. And the Friday after that. And somewhere between the second dinner and the third, the script they had constructed for a weekend in Lake Geneva was so thoroughly replaced by the unscripted, unpredictable, genuinely wonderful reality of two people discovering each other on their own terms that it became difficult, and then impossible, and then entirely unnecessary to remember which version of the story had come first. Becky kept her rule. She just revised it slightly, not she didn't lie, but she didn't pretend, and she was not, from that Friday in October onward, pretending anything. John had one hand on the door for a long time. He put it in his pocket. He came all the way in. Uncle Robert remained difficult. Some things, they both agreed cheerfully, were beyond redemption. Eleanor sent Becky a card in November with a pressed autumn leaf inside it and 3 sentences that said more than most letters 3 pages long. Diana texted on a random Wednesday in December simply, "Told you." Becky sent back a single laughing face and then called her, and they talked for an hour. And on a Sunday evening in the following October, exactly 1 year after a lake path and a sky full of stars and a man who stopped walking and said her name and then didn't say anything else because he wasn't finished thinking, John Jackson finished thinking. He did it simply and privately, the way he did most things that mattered. No audience. No performance. Just the two of them on the same lake path, the same October dark, the same enormous sky overhead. He asked. She said yes before he had finished the sentence. Because some things, it turns out, don't require memorization or preparation or a script agreed upon in advance. Some things arrive in the form of a strange phone call on a Thursday afternoon, and the only thing left to decide is whether you are brave enough to pick up. She had picked up. She kept him. And our final question for you, is there a moment you almost said no to something that turned out to change your life completely? Tell us your story in the comments. Because the best things often start with a phone call we almost didn't answer. And just like that, dear friends, another story finds its perfect ending. Becky walked into that weekend with a rule and a script and every intention of walking back out unchanged. John had one hand on the door for longer than he could honestly account for. And somewhere between Friday and Sunday, between a dinner table and a lake path and a sky full of October stars, two people stopped pretending and started something real. That is the thing about courage dressed up as a small decision. It rarely announces itself. It arrives as a phone call. As a stranger's name on your screen. As a weekend you almost said no to. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end. You are exactly why we do this, and we are grateful for every single minute you spent inside this story. If this moved you, if any moment gave you chills or made your heart catch, please like this video right now. It takes 1 second and it means the world to us. Drop a comment below and tell us, which moment hit you hardest. Was it Becky placing her hand over John's at the dinner table? The lake path? Or Eleanor's quiet, sharp eyes seeing everything? We read every comment. Every single one. And if you are not yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we have more stories coming that you absolutely cannot miss. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the best things in life sometimes arrive through the doors we almost didn't open. We will see you in the next story.